So next piece of information that you need for a good deadlift is what is a good deadlift and what does a good technique look like on a deadlift. Technique's always a funny one. The way we always review lifts in the STC community is using reference lines. So there are a series of lines that we look at in the body to break things down and make it a little bit easier. They go toe to ankle to knee, knee to hip to shoulder, elbow, shoulder, head. If we break the body down into those segments, it makes it much easier for us to assess what's going on in each lift. For the conventional deadlift, we're looking at toe to ankle, and we just want to make sure that we have nice pressure through the entire foot, very similar to the squat. Some people still use the similar grip technique, so they'll push their toe, little toe and heel into the floor at the same time, and even just use that little bit of a twist that we use in the squat quite a lot as well. Then we're going to look ankle to knee. There's not too much to gauge from here, it's more the overall leg. So if we look at ankle, knee, knee to hip, we can start to see whether we have knees bowing out throughout the lift. If that's changing as tension comes in, if it's changing as we get to mid-shin, usually the two spots that we're going to see problems within that area just generally means that we don't have enough tightness off the floor. So next and most important one, and shout out to Jess who's going to hold this position for 3 hours today, hip to shoulder line. This is where most things go on within the deadlift. So we're looking at whether obviously the angle of the knee and the angle of the hip both extend at the same time. That is the goal. And then from hip to shoulder, is our lumbar staying in the same position? Is our upper back staying in the same position? Are we maintaining our brace? Are we getting any lateral shift through the hips? Are we getting any pop up early through the hips? Lots of the deadlift is determined by what's happening in the trunk, so that hip to shoulder line. Then we go shoulder to elbow, and then we can continue that down to the wrist because that should be one line. The telltale here is if the elbows are bent, that's a problem. All right, we don't want bent elbows. We're not picking this up with our biceps. Again, Jess is shaking already. It's going to be a big day.
Sorry.
That's fine. So when I said there's no necessarily blanket technique for everybody with the deadlift, everyone's hips are going to be at a slightly different height. Sometimes knee angles are going to change depending on your setup. But what we can say is we want the bar over the middle of the foot. So this hand to bar line starts to become a reference line for us as well. So bar right up to the shoulder. Then we also want to consider that crease of the armpit should be over top of the barbell in this starting position as well. So that's going to determine where the hips sit and often where the knees start out as well. As we move through the lift, we just want a nice straight line for that barbell to move all the way through, and that's our reference line on the bar itself. Last one's just the head position. Now, there's a couple of different ways that people will cue this. Some people like to look down, some people like to look straight ahead, and some people like to look up. For myself, I just don't want to see it move. So if we're seeing movement through the head throughout the lift, that's usually where things are going to kind of start to break down and cause problems. So once you have set the position that works for you, looking up often helps you keep a little bit more extension. Looking down, if you're someone who tends to not engage the upper back very well, sometimes works. So it's finding the right spot for you, but making sure that you stay in that position throughout. Now, big contentious topic, obviously for those of you who are powerlifters, have been to powerlifting meets, or even are just trolls on the internet, is the rounded back deadlift. Now, again, the same rule really applies for the back as the head. If we see movement through the lift, especially if we as we start to move into the weight, we start to see that back round as we go, that's a problem. That means we're not supporting the load and we're putting a lot of pressure through the spine. If we can start in a rounded position and maintain that primarily from the thoracic and not the lumbar, that's generally totally fine. Some people will even round their lumbar spine, which is okay. Jess's typical setup actually looks a lot like this, where she does have that kind of compressed rib cage and a slightly rounded upper back. But once the barbell breaks the floor, there's no further movement in that upper back. That means she's safe, she's supporting the load, and everything's working the way that it should be. If we're seeing it continually move into that compression throughout, then we've got some real problems and we need to either back the load off or go away and work on strengthening that. So if you're going to review your lifts, they're the areas you're going to look at. So what's happening? Toe to ankle to knee to hip to shoulder down to the bar, that all becomes one line. What's going on with the head? And just break those down into little segments and look at them individually before you just jump to my back rounded or anything like that. It'll help you a lot more with figuring out what's going on with your lifts and making sure that they're safe and as effective and strong as they could be. All right.